Importance of familiarizing oneself about the different kinds of history, and I'm Joanna Marie Ilagan from BSED Science 1A. What is history? History is a topic that many find boring to study or a waste of time. History is the knowledge of and study of the past. It is the story of the past and the form of collective memory. History is the story of who we are, where we came from, and can potentially reveal where we are headed. Why study history? History is for human self-knowledge. The only clue to what man can do is what man has done. The value of history, then, is that it teaches us what man has done and thus what man is. By R.G. Collingwood. Let's tackle the importance of history. History allows us to know first the world. History gives us a very clear picture of how the various aspects of society, such as technology, governmental system, and even society as a whole, work in the past, so we understand how it came to work the way it is now. Next is society and other people. Studying history allows us to observe and understand how people and societies behave. History provides us with the data that is used to create laws, theories, and various aspects of societies. Third is the identity. History can help us provide us with a sense of identity. Historians have been able to learn about how countries, families, and groups were formed and how they evolved and developed over time. Fourth is the present-day issues. History helps us to understand present-day issues by asking deeper questions as to why things are the way they are. Like how the dictatorship of Marcos stopped by the help of Cory Aquino and the People Power Revolution. Last is the process of change over time. If you want to truly understand why something happened in any area or field, such as one political party winning, you need to look for the factors that took place earlier. The reasons or the events happened before that causes this effect up to this day. And here are the some of the history that my group mates will discuss later on. For my conclusion, to study history is to study change. Studying history teaches us about the present, builds empathy through studying the lives and struggles of others. It can be intensely personal, and everything has a history. That would be all. Thank you for listening.
So, good day everyone. I will be discussing about in what way can that internal and external criticism in validating the content and context of the primary sources. So, the historian's primary tool of understanding and interpreting the past is the historical sources. So, historical sources ascertain historical facts, and those facts are often then analyzed and interpreted by the historian to weave historical narrative. So, one of the ways that historians used to do is to criticize the historical sources. In validating content and context of the primary sources, historians should conduct an internal and external criticism. So, sa paanong paraan yung internal and external criticism sa pagbabalidate o pagtukoy kung ang primary sources or the historical sources ay nagsasabi or nagsasaad ng katotohanan o hindi. So, first is yung internal criticism. So, ano yung internal criticism? Internal criticism is used to detect and determine whether the documents contains errors or lies. In short, through conducting internal criticism, dito malalaman kung yung specific primary sources ba ay naglalaman ng katotohanan nung yung content and context of the primary sources. So, dito tinitingnan yung content ng source at ini-examine. So, example na mga bagay na tinitingnan in conducting internal criticism is yung by looking at the author of the source, its context, the agenda behind the creation, the knowledge which inform it, and also its intended purpose. So, and then, while the external criticism, it examines the authenticity of the document or the evidence. So, it is done by examining the physical characteristic of a source. So, at yung mga bagay na tinitingnan in conducting external criticism is the quality ng evidence, yung type ng ink na ginamit, the language and words na ginamit sa historical evidence. Like for example na nagpapakita na ang internal and external criticism is the effective way in validating content and context of the primary sources. So, based from the module or preferences, one of the most scandalous cases of deception in Philippine history is the Hawks Code of Calantiao. So, the document was sold to the National Library and was regarded as an important pre-colonial document. So, it is until 1968. So, when American historian William Henry Scott debunked the authenticity of the code due to the anachronism and lack of evidence to prove that the code existed in the pre-colonial Philippine history. So, dito masasabi natin na yung internal and external criticism ay napakahalaga na dapat bigyang pansin ng mga historian sa paggawa nila ng document about history. So, isa itong halimbawa na sa paggandak ng internal and external criticism ng mga historian, dito nila nalalaman kung yung evidence na kanilang gagamitin ay makatotohanan nga ba o hindi. So, another example of primary sources are the Speech of Corazon, Proclamation of Philippine Independence, Kartilya ng Katipunan, Pigafetta Chronicle, political caricature. For sure, those primary sources are gone through these two kinds of criticism to interpret the history. Though meron mang some complicity in interpreting historical facts, but historians use this criticism para maibigay o maihayag pa rin yung mga historical events na mahalaga pa rin nating malaman. So, to properly interpret primary sources through examining the content and context of the documents with the application of criticism or the internal criticism. So, validating historical sources is important because the use of unverified, falsified, and untruthful historical sources can lead to equally false conclusions, and without criticism or a thorough criticism of historical evidences or the primary sources, historical interpretation will be injustice, and also lies will all be probable. Thank you. That's all po.
Hi. Today I'm going to discuss about the Figafetta Chronicles. So, Figafetta Chronicle was written by Antonio Figafetta, or also known as Antonio Lambordo or Francisco Antonio Figafetta. So, Antonio Figafetta was a famous traveler who accompanied Magellan during his circumnavigation of the world. And his account is considered as the most credible sources when studying history, specifically the pre-colonial Philippines. The reason why the Wikipedia account was considered as the credible sources and reliable sources is because Wikipedia was very detailed when giving description to the things that he have encountered during his voyage with Magellan. Specifically, in his account, it stated that on March 16, 1521, they reached the Philippine archipelago. And March 18, 1521 is the first encounter with the Filipino people, and Pigafetta described them as very familiar and very friendly, because when they encounter with in the very first time, the Filipino people welcome the Magellanese crew with foods and drinks. That's why Pigafetta described the Filipino people as very friendly and very familiar. So in March 31, 1521, the very first mass in the Philippines was conducted by Father Pedro de Valderrama. So remember that on March 31, 1521, Easter Sunday, that is the very first mass in the Philippines. First mass in the Philippines, March 31, 1521. On April 18, Magellan encouraged the King of Cebu to be a good Christian, and after 8 days, the whole people in the island baptized as a Christian. On April 27, 1521, Magellan died because during his battle with Lapu-Lapu, he was pierced with a poisoned arrow on his legs that caused him to death. So that is why Magellan died during his battle with Lapu-Lapu. All in all, when analyzing the Wikipedia account, it was giving a very important information regarding the Philippine history and how the Christianism started in the Philippines. But in Pigafetta's account is you can found there is some biases since Pigafetta is writing in 16th century European perspective. Since Pigafetta sees that their belief and religion is superior compared to the belief system of the Filipino people, where the belief system of the Filipino was described by Figafetta as barbaric and demonic. So the example of these biases is this how Pigafetta sees the belief system of the Filipino. So Pigafetta looking down on the belief system of the Filipino because he considered that the belief system of the Filipino people is very barbaric and demonic. That is very far away from their standard. So the belief system of the Filipino is not on the standard of the European culture. The next one is Pigafetta also highlight the illiteracy of the Filipino people when he uh, when he noticed the amazement and the astonishment of the Filipino people when they see the artillery, the materials, or the boats, or anything that uh, anything that they bring to the island. So Pigafetta considered that the Filipino people is very outdated and illiterate. So that is one of the biases that you can see in Pigafetta Chronicles. The last one is Pigafetta also criticizes and judges how the Filipino wear clothes because he noticed that the Filipino people are just wearing a few garments. So that's why he criticizes and judges on how people wear this. And and you and in analyzing this perspective of Pigafetta, so I think that Pigafetta's vision is too narrow to recognize that the reason why Filipino people are wearing few garments is because the tropical environment or the tropical weather of the Philippines. So that is all about the Chronicle of Pigafetta, or the Pigafetta's account book, who give us a very important information regarding the pre-colonial Philippines in studying history. That's it. Thank you.
Yes, so let me introduce myself first. I am Estrella Scan from BSED Science 1A, and the topic that was assigned to me is to give a short discussion about the existing Kartilya ng Katipunan. So, Kartilya ng Katipunan refers to a guidebook which consists significant rules as well as principles for every member of the organization called Katipunan, or an organization who desire to overthrow foreign colonizers before, may it be a new member or an old one. They used this guidebook itself. So the original copy of this guidebook was said to be written by Jacinto and was later revised by Andres Bonifacio. Another thing is that this guidebook is not just considered as an existing evidence of how valuable, how rich our Philippine history was, but it is also an influential file which consists vital teachings where the Katipuners used to stand on, as well as which can also be used for every Filipinos today in order for us to maintain the freedom or the independence that people before really fought hard for it. So, personally, I can consider it as a stable ground where our nationalistic and our moral principle lies as we strive to be a better citizen of our beloved country. So, this guidebook has numerous principles listed in it, and one of those principles is that uh, a good deed lacks virtues when it springs from or for personal profit and not from a sincere desire to do good. Another one is that a life that is not dedicated to a great or sacred cause is like a tree without a shade or with a poisonous weed. So that's what is um, the narrow um, definition of Kartilian Katipunan. Thank you.
So, um, again, among so many significant events that has happened in Philippine history, like say for example, the Cavite Mutiny, the execution of Dr. Jose Rizal, the um, the discovery of the Philippines by Ferdinand Magellan, the first mass, and so on and so forth, may isang significant event na should I say kailangan alam ng lahat ng Pilipino. And what is that? That is the proclamation of the Philippine independence on June 12, 1989 under the leadership of our very first and former President Emilio Aguinaldo. So hindi ko alam kung alam ng lahat, but the Philippines has been colonized for more than 3 centuries. We have been colonized by Spanish colonizers for 333 years. So imagine 333 years, and after those years, under the leadership of ni Emilio Aguinaldo, we have been freed from the hands of Spanish colonizers. Naiwagayway ang bandila ng Pilipinas noong June 12, 1989, and it is not new for us na yung mga component ng bandila ng Pilipinas have significant meanings. Like say for example yung triangle na white, yung color red and blue, yung tatlong stars, and yung araw at yung 8 races nito, yung rays ng sun. So With regards to that, alam natin na yung white na color na yung triangle na white dun sa bandila ng Pilipinas basically symbolizes the Katipunan Society that was established under the leadership of one of our well-known heroes, who is Andres Bonifacio. And the blue or the red and the blue color of the flag, ang alam natin, it symbolizes peace and courage of Filipinos. But our basic education omits the fact that those two colors, the red and the blue, signifies signifies the flag of the United States of America. So, medyo confusing kasi nga bandila ng Pilipinas pero somehow may konting signification sa flag ng ibang bansa. And that is because um, the red and blue color, yun nga, signifies the flag of the United States because, or to commemorate the friendship or the help that they rendered us for us to be able to be freed from the hands of Spanish colonizers. Yun nga, to commemorate and to remember, parang remembrance, na yung bansa, yung United States and the Philippines um, are friend are countries that are interconnected. Parang nandun yung connection kasi nga yung tulong na inirender nila. So, isa pa is yung Cavite Mutiny na nabanggit ko kanina. Alam natin na parang siya yung naging mitya, yung naging starting fire para magkaroon ng revolution yung mga Filipinos against the Spanish colonizers. Kasi alam natin na way back dun sa Spanish colonization period or Spanish era sa Philippines, ang basically namumuno are the Gobernador General. Under Gobernador General, meron tayong mga Guardia Civil or the Civil Guards, and we also have the friars or mga fraile and the archbishops. Masyadong mataas yung taxation dati sa lupa, yung mga buwis na binabayaran ng mga Pilipino. Kaya sabi ni Teodoro Agoncillo concluded that the revolution was an agrarian revolution kasi nga parang naging pag-aalsa ng mga farmers, ng mga farmer yung naging revolution kasi masyado silang nagigipit sa sobrang taas ng buwis na binabayaran nila. Tapos may mga records din na nagpapatunay na yung mga guardia civil, yung mga civil guards dati is binabaril yung mga prisoners, yung mga preso. Tapos ang pinapalabas nila is nag-a-attempt yung mga prisoners na tumakas, kaya nila binabaril. But in fact, gusto lang talaga nilang patayin yung mga preso without proper reason why. Yung parang naging highlight sa Cavite Mutiny is yung pag-execute sa Gomburza, Padre Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora. They are executed because napag-alaman ng mga gobernador general na namumuno noon na kasali yung tatlong pare sa pag-aalsa ng ginawa ng mga Pilipino. Tapos parang yun yung naging mitya, kaya nagkaroon ng revolution hanggang sa nabuo ang Katipunan, hanggang sa tumulong ang mga United States para mapalaya ang Pilipinas.
Hello, I'm Joshua G. Desilio, BSED 1 Science, and today I'm going to discuss and give information about sa caricature ni Alfred Macoy sa Philippines politics during American era noong 1900s until 1940s. Before going to the main point of this topic, first of all, what is caricature? Kailangan muna nating malaman kung ano ba ang caricature. Caricature is one of the forms of art, especially in drawing or sketching. When you create a caricature, you draw the image of your subject into exaggerated or natural way, and it can also be used to compliment or insult someone, especially in politics or other platforms in a entertainment purpose. Caricature can be a weapon to express the true story of an event or an event in life. But the scenes and line of a story can be unrealistic due to the purpose and idea of the creature. And during the political time in the Philippines, in the American era, one of the weapons that express the scenarios in the past is the caricature of Alfred Macoy, or Alfred Al William Macoy, who is an American historian and educator. Alfred Macoy is the Fred Harvey Harrington Professor of History at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He specialized in the history of the Philippines, foreign policy of the United States, European colonization of the Southeast Asia, illegal drug trade, and Central Intelligence Agency covert operations. The purpose of Macoy in creating his caricature about the political in the Philippines in the American era is to expose the unbiased treatment of the landowners or the landlords to their farmers. The caricature of Macoy is about expressing the true story about the tragic events of the old farmers experienced in the past and the other unfair treatment of the powerful persons to the poor Filipino citizens in the American era. The dates and names of the caricatures of Alfred Macoy of when it published are the Philippine Cartoons, year 1985, Anarchy of Families, 1994, Closer Than Brothers, Manhood at the Philippine Military Academy, 2000, and Lives at the Margin, 2001. Through the talents and good purpose of Alfred Macoy, it opens up a lot of eyes of the Filipino and other people in the other countries. The caricature emphasized the injustice and unfair actions of the landowners, of the farmers. And because of that, it gives a lot of knowledge and protections for the farmers in the present times that they have also a rights as a farmer and a human citizen. That's all. Thank you po.
Corazon Aquino's speech before the U.S. Congress. Corazon Cuanco Aquino functioned as a symbol of the restoration of democracy and the overthrow of the Marcos dictatorship in 1986. So, we know naman po na si Cory Aquino ay simbolo ng democracy here in the Philippines since parang siya yung head or nag-lead para ma-stop yung martial law na headed by Marcos dictatorship. So, the EDSA People Power, which installed Cory Aquino in the presidency, put the Philippines in the international spotlight overthrowing a dictator through peaceful means. So, through EDSA People Power, yan yung naging instrument para mapatalsik ang diktador na si Marcos noong kapanahunan niya. And siya yung nagpalit bilang president during that time. Cory was easily in figure of the said revolution as the widow of the slain Marcos oppositionist and former Senator Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. Cory was hoisted as the antithesis of the dictator. Her image as mourning widowed housewife who always been in the shadow of her husband and relatives and had no experience in politics was just posed against Marcos' statesmanship, eloquence, charisma, and cunning political skills. So, si Cory Aquino, bago siya naging president or naging head ng EDSA People Power, siya ay kilala din na asawa ng dating senador na si Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. Palagi siyang nandun kung nasaan ang asawa niya. Kilala siya bilang asawa ni Ninoy Aquino Jr. So, byuda siya ni Benigno Aquino. Nevertheless, Cory was able to capture the imagination of the people whose right and freedom had long been compromised throughout the Marcos regime. This is despite the fact that Cory came from a rich haciendero family in Tarlac and has owned vast state of sugar plantation and whose relatives occupied local and national government position. So, on 18 September 1986, 7 months since Cory became president, she went to United States and spoke before the joint session of the U.S. Congress. So, si Cory was welcomed with long applause. Welcome siya sa U.S. Congress as she addressed the United States about her presidency and the challenges faced by our country, the new republic. So, she began her speech with the story of her leaving the United States 3 years prior as a newly widowed wife of Ninoy Aquino. She then told of Ninoy's character, conviction, and resolve in opposing authoritarianism of Marcos. She talked of the 3 times that Ninoy, including his demise on 23 August 1983. The first time was when dictatorship detained Ninoy with other dissenters. So, Cory related that the government sought to break him by indignities and terror. They locked him up in a tiny, nearly airless cell in a military camp in the north. They stripped him naked and held a threat of a sudden midnight execution over his head. Ninoy had held up manfully under all of it. I barely did as well. For 43 days, the authorities would not tell me what happened to him. This was the first time my children and I felt we had lost him. So, based dun sa statement ni Cory Aquino, sinabi niya dun sa Congress na about yung sa pagkakakulong ni Ninoy Aquino kasama yung ibang mga dissenters. So, sinabi niya kung anong nangyari doon at kung gaano sa loob ng 43 days na-lost yung connection nila sa kada isa na ay nakala nila na patay na si Ninoy talaga. So, Cory continued that when Ninoy survived the first detention, he then charged of subversion, murder, and other crimes. He was tried by a military court whose legitimacy Ninoy adamantly questioned. To solidify his protest, Ninoy decided to do a hunger strike and fasted for days. Cory treated this event as the second time that their family lost. And she said that when that didn't work, they put him on a trial for subversion, murder, and a host of other crimes. Before a military commission, Ninoy challenged its authority and went on a fast. If he survived it, then he felt God intended him for another fate. We had lost him again, for nothing would hold him back from his determination to see his fast though to the end. Through the end, he stopped only when he dawned on him that the government would keep his body alive after the fast had destroyed his brain. And so, with barely any life in his body, he called off the fast on the 40th day. So, Ninoy's death was the third and the last time that Cory and children lost Ninoy. And then, sabi ni Cory, they lost him na. And more painfully than in the past, the news came to them sa Boston. Nasa Boston sila during that time. And it had to be after the 3 happiest years of their lives together. But his death was our country's resurrection and the courage and faith by which alone they could be free again. So, sabi ni Cory, the dictator had called him a nobody, yet the 2 million people threw aside their passivity and fear and escorted him to his grave. So, nung namatay si Ninoy, during that time, yung dictator na, which alam naman natin si Marcos, tinawag siya na nobody. Parang walang nakakilala sino, wala siya kung sino, hindi siya kilala or wala siyang posisyon. Pero, nung namatay siya, 2 million na tao yung pumunta, nakiluksa at nag-escort papunta sa kanyang huling hantungan. So, Cory attributes the peaceful EDSA revolution to the martyrdom of Ninoy. She stated that the death of Ninoy sparked the revolution and the responsibility of offering the democratic alternative had fallen on her shoulder. So, si Cory as a widowed wife ni Ninoy, feeling niya na nasa kanya na yung responsibility para mapalaya ang bansa natin sa martial law at sa dictator na si Marcos. So, sabi niya, I held fast to Ninoy's conviction that it must be by the ways of democracy. I held out for participation in the 1984 election the dictatorship called. Even if I knew it would be rigged, I was warned by the lawyers of the opposition and that I ran the grave risk of legitimizing the foregone results of election that were clearly going to be fraudulent. But I was not fighting for lawyers, but for the people in whose intelligence I had implicit faith by the exercise of democracy. Even in a dictatorship, they would be prepared for democracy when it came. And then also, it was the only way I knew by which we could measure our power, even in the terms of dictated by the dictatorship. The people vindicated me in an election shamefully marked by government thuggery and fraud. The opposition swept the election, garnering a clear majority of the votes, even if they ended up, thanks to corrupt Commission on Elections, sabi niya, with barely third of the seats in parliament. Now, I knew our power. So, Cory talked about her miraculous victory through the people's struggle and continued talking about her earliest initiative as the president of a restored democracy. So, yung speech ni Cory Aquino before the US Congress, sinabi niya doon na hindi siya makapaniwala na nanalo pa din siya sa said election kahit na madaming risk or mga barriers like dinaya or pinagbantaan siya ng ibang lawyers sa kabilang kampo. Nanalo pa din siya kasi inisip niya na ang nakikipaglaban siya hindi para sa mga abogado kundi para sa mga Pilipino. So, she stated that she intended to forge and draw reconciliation after a bloody and polarizing dictatorship. Cory emphasized the importance of the EDSA revolution in terms of being a limited revolution that respected the life of freedom of every Filipino. She also boasted of the restoration of a fully constitutional government whose constitution gave utmost respect to the Bill of Rights. She reported to the U.S. Congress, "Again, as we restore democracy by the ways of democracy, so are we completing the constitutional structures of our new democracy under a constitution that already gives all respect to the Bill of Rights. A jealously independent constitutional commission is completing its draft, which will be submitted later this year to popular referendum. When it is approved, there will be elections for both national and local position, so within about a year from a peaceful but national upheaval that overturned a dictatorship, we shall have returned to full constitutional government." So, si Cory again, nag-proceed yung speech niya, nag-proceed again sa peace agenda with the existing Como insurgency aggravated by the dictatorial and authoritarian measure Ferdinand Marcos. So, Cory's peace agenda involves political initiatives and reintegral program to persuade insurgents to leave the countryside and return to the mainstream society to participate in the restoration. So, kapag inanalyze po natin yung speech ni Cory Aquino, Cory Aquino's speech was a very important event in the political and diplomatic history of the country because it was arguably cemented in the legitimacy of the EDSA government in the international arena. So, it serves as a source or a proof na yung EDSA people power ay nangyari talaga dito sa Philippines. And nangyari talaga yung pagpapatalsik nila sa dictatorial or sa martial law or kay Ferdinand Marcos. So, the speech talk about of her family background. Syempre, yung speech niya about sa pamilya niya, paano sila pinahirapan ng gobyerno during sa pamumuno ni Marcos, and kung ano yung relasyon niya or yung buhay niya dati kasama yung asawa niya na si Ninoy Aquino. It is well known that it was Ninoy who served as the real leading figure of the opposition at that time. So parang nangyari yung EDSA revolution dahil sa idea dahil kay Ninoy, parang siya yung reason or napukaw yung ni Cory Aquino dahil kay Ninoy. Si Ninoy talaga yung reason kung bakit nagkaroon ng EDSA revolution. Ninoy's eloquence and charisma can very well compete with that of Marcos. In her speech, Cory talked at length about Ninoy's toil and suffering at the hands of the dictatorship that he resisted. Even when she proceeded talking about her new government, she still goes back to Ninoy's legacies and lessons. So, mapapansin mo na halos sa kada sentence or phrase niya, ganyan-ganyan, paragraph, bumabalik pa din siya sa yung speech na is umiikot pa din pabalik kay Ninoy Aquino and sa legacies na iniwan niya at sa mga lessons na binigay niya. So, moreover, her attribution of the revolution to Ninoy's death and demonstrate not only Cory's personal perception on the revolution, but since she was the president, it also represents what the dominant discourse was at that point in our history. So, the ideology or the principles of new democratic government can be seen in the same speech. Aquino was able to draw the sharp contrast between her and government and of her predecessors by expressing her commitment to a democratic constitution drafted by an independent commission. She claims that such constitution upholds and adheres to the rights and liberty of the Filipino people. Cory also hoisted herself as the reconciliator agent after more than 2 decades of polarizing authoritarian politics. So, for example, nakita ni Cory Aquino na yung blown up ng communist insurgency is a product or result ng repressive and corrupt government. So, her response to this insurgency roots from her diametric opposition of the dictator, initiating reintegration of communist rebels to the mainstream Philippine society. Cory claims that her main approach to this problem is through peace and not through the sword of war. So, despite Cory's effort to hoist herself as the exact opposite of Marcos, her speech still revealed certain parallelism between her and the Marcos government. This is seen in terms of continuing the alliance between the Philippines and the US despite the known affinity between the said world superpower and Marcos. So, the Aquino regime, as seen in Corin's acceptance of the invitation to address the U.S. Congress and to the content of the speech, U.S. and effectively implemented an essentially similar foreign policy to that of the dictatorship. For example, si Cory, nakilala siya, recognized that nakilala niya na ang large sum of foreign debits incurred by the Marcos regime never benefited the Filipino people. So, during si Cory, na laman niya na napakalaki yung utang ng ni Marcos, ng Marcos administration, and nalaman din niya na sa laki ng utang na yon is never naman na tulungan nito or nanginabang yung bansa natin. So, nevertheless, Cory expressed her intention to pay off those debits. Sinabi niya, nababayaran niya. Unknown to many Filipinos was the fact that there was a choice of waiving the said debit because those were the debit of the dictator and not of the country. Cory's decision is an indicator of her government's intention to carry on a debit-driven economy. Reading through Aquino's speech, we can already take cues not just on Cory's individual ideas and aspiration but also guiding principles and frameworks of the government that she represents.
So let's focus on the real topic. So explain that a primary sources presented can be both content and context credible in bias historical source of historical facts and evidences. So in my criticizing, yes, can be both content and context credible in historical sources. Why? Because primary source could be credible in terms of being reliable sources when it comes to evidences of past. So, ito yung primary source kasi is siya yung nagiging mata natin sa katotohanan at karunungan ng mga totoong nangyari talaga. Dahil dito sa primary sources, naka-input na yung mga information and details and evidences. But primary sources can be biased. Why? Because historical writings were created by people whose opinions and experiences influence their points of view, and this is reflected in what they wrote. So, nagiging bias siya kapag may gumagawa ng bagong written document about something, history about past. Yung mga details doon is napapalitan na kung saan hindi sila nag-base sa history bagkos sa kanilang experiences and opinions. Doon pa lang bias na kasi dito totoo lahat yung mga ini-input nila doon. And kapag na-publish na yun na yung mga madalas mababasa ng mga tao, ng mga estudyante. So, it can be both content and context credible and vice historical source of historical facts and evidence. So, for example, yung kay Lapu-Lapu, diba? Sinabi na si Magellan daw yung nakapatay kay Lapu-Lapu. Pero sa totoo, hindi. Sa pagkakalam ko, yung mga kawal ni Lapu-Lapu ang siyang tunay na nakapatay kay Magellan. And dahil pinuno si Magellan, sinabing siya ang pumatay. Pero sa totoo lamang, hindi totoo.